As I said at the beginning, our April spring conference, we like to focus on our young professionals, and we try to explore topics which may push us to think differently about the role that standards can play in solving new and complex technical, economic, and social challenges. Our next speaker today is joining us all the way from Canada and genuinely embodies the young professional focus of our event. This 16-year-old from the Knowledge Society has worked on projects spanning from gene editing bacteria, building machine learning models, strategic planning for non-profits in Africa. And she's currently building a project to scale safe birthing equipment in West Africa. It's a warm welcome to Isabelle Grandic. Morning, Isabella.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Very good. Where do we find you this morning?
I'm in Toronto, so it's bright and early, 6 a.m., but I'm still very excited to be here.
Well, thank you for getting up so early for us, and we look forward to hearing what you got to say. So the floor is yours.
Awesome. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Hi, everyone. I'm Isabella, and I'm very excited today to talk about one of my favorite, if not my recent most favorite topic, and I'll explain why it has to be one of my favorite and most recent favorite in a second. I'm going to be talking about women's health and technology, because I think this is an underplayed area of the healthcare system. And as you'll see in a moment, there's so many opportunities for innovation, digital, and standards too. So let's just hop right into it. So a little bit about me. I've been part of a program called the Knowledge Society, which is the logo to the bottom left. And it is an Olympic level training program for young people around the world, around North America that are aged 13 to 17. And the goal of TCAS isn't to train for the Olympics of swimming or the Olympics of basketball. TCAS is all about the Olympics of problem solving. So throughout the program, I've been exposed to different technologies and how they apply to solving big problems in the world. I worked on projects in the alternative protein space. So I had the chance to live in Amsterdam this summer and then meet some of the leaders in cultured meat, which is a crazy technology and science that uses stem cell to grow real muscle tissues. And now I'm an advisor for Aleph Farms, which is a cultured meat company based out of Israel that makes steak out of stem cells. So you can eat steak, it tastes exactly like steak, it has the nutritional profile of steak, but no cows are killed in the process. Other things that I've had the opportunity to do is work with companies like Google's Sidewalk Labs on a smart city and affordable housing plan, Kidogo to scale their early childhood development centers in East Africa. I've had the opportunity to keynote around the world at Microsoft's largest event, at Web Summit, and the list goes on. So I've had a crazy, wild year and a half now, 2 years almost, doing different projects from real estate to banking to anything in between and science and technology. But now for the past few weeks and months, I've been super passionate and interested in women's health. I recently wrote a review, which I'll give you guys access to at the end after this presentation, which is just an in-depth dive in the science of women's health. And now I'm working on a project to, again, scale birthing equipment and scale safe birthing practices in West Africa, specifically northern Nigeria, which I can talk about more in a bit. So I want to start by, I wasn't always this kid that was literally around the world working on these interesting projects. I was pretty normal growing up. I had this humanitarian itch all the time. I wanted the world to be equal. I wanted everyone to have equal opportunities. It was just kind of a passion of mine. And I grew up in the Canadian education system, which is pretty forward thinking. And I remember at a young age, I really learned about equality and how we want to treat everyone equal. I also have a younger brother. He's almost more than 3 years younger than me. And first few years of life, I thought he was a toy. But once I realized that he wasn't a toy and he's a living, breathing human being, we instantly became very competitive, as siblings do. And I remember, when I was 6 or 7, we'd always want to have races. We want to run. I'd be like, his name is Stefan. So I'd be like, Stefan, I'm going to beat you at the race. And despite him being younger than me, he always won the races. And I remember, we constantly were just always getting in an argument. I'm like, I'm going to beat you today. And then we just run. And then I'd always lose. And this was really confusing. This was confusing because in the Canadian education system, I was taught to believe that, males and females are equal. And I was like, how can he be beating me if I'm older than him? And, if we have equal opportunity and I'm older, I don't know, my logic might have been a little flawed. But I remember after a while, I got really frustrated. And I went to my mom and I was like, why is Stefan constantly beating me? Am I not good enough? Am I this and that? And she was like, well, girls and boys are not equal. boys are built stronger and they're built to do sports more and that kind of thing. And I remember being like, well, that's not true because we're all equal. And then she was like, no, you're not equal. You should be treated equally, but you yourselves are not equal, especially the genders. There are disparities. And this was really confusing. It almost seemed to go against everything that I was learning, everything that I almost stood for. And I think this is a similar issue. Obviously, being treated equally is not the same as being equal. And I think this is something that we mix up in our lives today, in the rules that we place, in these in our world where we want to achieve equality, but we're not equal. Women and men are not the same scientifically and biologically. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be treated the same, but I think it's something that we integrate. We want this idea of equality everywhere, but we don't really understand what it means to be equal, what it means to treat everyone equally. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, this idea that we aren't all the same, especially between, I'm going to be talking about biological sex, not gender, because I know arguably around the world there's more than two genders, but so today when I refer to male and female, that is what I'm referring to. But today, between males and females, there are huge differences. There's also differences between people, but that's what I'm going to talk about today. And specifically, as it relates to the health and safety standard. I think treating women and men with equal opportunities will disrupt so many other standards like medical devices, how we have standards for aviation, space, and defense, and the list goes on. But today I'm talking about health and safety because I think that's the one that's going to be disrupted the most. And I also think that's the one that's the most far behind. So I have 4 different ways that the standards are going to be affected. But before I go into test inclusivity, sex-specific treatments, etc., I want to talk about why this is important, why it exists, what is the science behind it, because I think once we have a deep understanding of where these issues come from, we can start to build excellence around them. So scientifically, women are not equal to men. There's 2 ways that this is true. The first is the biological side. What we see through different reports, research papers, medical sciences, we see that the likelihood of disease and the chances that someone will get a disease is sex specific. So women are more likely to get things like, here we have 4 times more likely, 2 times more likely, 3 times more likely, 2/3 of patients, 80% of patients. So if we were truly equal in nature, we would see equality in who gets what diseases, but that's very rarely true. There are diseases where men are more likely to get them, and there are many diseases where women are more likely to get them. So that's the biological side of things. So in nature, we're not made out of the same particles. We don't do the same processes. Our bodies have, different organs at some times. Our organs are different shapes, etc. That's why there's a difference there. But then we also have systematic inequalities. Women get diagnosed later. We're less represented in trials. And because we're less represented in trials and we get diagnosed later, a lot of times our treatments are wrong. So there's these 2 types of inequality. One is fundamental, and the other one is system imposed. And I think standards can help us, take this biological inequality and help distribute it to make it equal. Why is there even an inequality? Was my first question that I asked. Well, if we look at what an actual disease is, when we have certain factors in the body, that can give us some disease. So for example, if my arteries have plaque in them, that might be a factor that contributes to the heart disease. The same could be true for lack of disease. So if my arteries don't have plaque in them, let's say that's whatever A is, then I might have a lack of disease. B might be my hormonal levels, C might be the pH levels of my body, etc. So all of these factors are in the body, and they either give us a disease or a lack of disease. Here's the important part. Factors can give us outcomes. So when you add a bunch of things, you get an outcome. That's simple math, but different factors can mean different outcomes, but they can also mean the same outcomes. So we can add to 10, so the first numbers, obviously we're not adding the same numbers, but we still get the same outcome. The important thing here is the root causes are not the same. So yes, we get 10 both times, but why we get 10 is different. Women and men have different factors in our body. So when we add things, we can get the same outcome. We can get the outcome more often. We can get different outcomes. But it doesn't really matter what the outcome is. It doesn't matter what the diseases are. The fact is that the root causes, the reasons why these things exist, are different. How do we know they're different? Hormones. So if we look at females versus males, so the blue is males, the blue is females, the yellow is males, we can see like throughout the lifetime, so this would be right to the left is age 0 all the way to, let's just say, age 80, the average lifespan. We can see like the two lives are dramatically different. And hormones, this is more like sex hormones, do so much more than reproductive organ stuff, which is what we believed for a really long time. And I'll talk more about how we know that they do so much more in the body. So we basically have this hormonal pattern that tells us, both genders experience some decline in hormones, but the way they experience it is so different. Like you can see these two large increases in hormones right here. That's pregnancy. I've never seen a man get pregnant because they can't, because they don't have the same hormones. So we have different hormones, which means there's different factors in our body, and our bodies can do different things. There's 4 main parts to characterize the female body. How do I know there's 4 main parts? Well, there's 4 different hormonal patterns we see throughout that life cycle. These are the hormonal patterns. Each of those colors represents one of the main hormones in the process. I won't go too deep into what the hormones are and how they work, but I will give some resources at the end to do so. But what's important to know is within each of these processes, puberty, menstruation, pregnancy, and menopause, there are 3 to 4 main hormones, and they happen in some sort of cycle. To simplify it a bit, I have arrows. This is basically what the hormones do. When you start puberty, you go up the hormonal ladder into fertility land, into the ability to have a baby. Once you grow up the puberty ladder and you gain more and more hormones in your body, I think if you have teenage kids at home, I am a teenager, so front line on this. Then we have menstruation. And menstruation, I like to think about it as a Ferris wheel. So the Ferris wheel has different seats. Let's just say it has 28 seats, and the Ferris wheel moves in cycles. Menstruation, has 28 seats because that's the average length of menstruation. Each seat represents a day, and it takes a month or around 28 days to go around this Ferris wheel. So there's 28 spots, and it takes one cycle to go around. Within each day of that Ferris wheel, each of those cycles, there's a different view. So when you're at the bottom of the Ferris wheel versus when you're at the top of the Ferris wheel, you are going to see different things. And when you see different things, you have a top view or bottom view, or you're at the first quarter, the second quarter, that represents hormonal changes. So essentially menstruation is this constant Ferris wheel, this constant cycle where every day you have a little bit of a different view, your body's a little bit different, you have different hormones, and then it just constantly goes round and round. When you first start menstruating, this Ferris wheel is pretty slow to start. It could be regular. Sometimes it's regular. It really depends on your Ferris wheel cycle. As it goes later and later in life, the Ferris wheel starts to get rusty. It starts to slow down. So that would be the best analogy I have for menstruation. So with this arrow, as you can see, it's just a constant periodic function. Then we have pregnancy. Pregnancy, I was thinking about a good analogy, and I was like, pregnancy hormonally is like skydiving. You first have the idea to go skydiving. You're like, this is going to be awesome. And then you pay for it. You go in the airplane, and then all of a sudden you're looking down literally into the world, and you're like, I don't know if this is the best idea ever. And then you get really scared and have a little bit of a panic attack. That's when you've climbed up this arrow, and you're at the top of that arrow. Now you're about to go down and do the whole skydiving thing, and then you're like, oh no. But then when you get to the bottom of the world, and you're like, I just did the craziest thing ever. Hormonally, that is what pregnancy is like. Now, women move from menstruation to pregnancy how often they like. Some women don't get pregnant for, out of choice. Some can't get pregnant because maybe they have diseases or pregnancy issues. And I'll talk about female-specific diseases in about a minute. But that is the main cycle. So this is the fertility period. This is the ability to get pregnant. That's why we had puberty, to get to this phase 2 and 3. And then we have menopause. And that is when that Ferris wheel starts to decline in function. That is when we go back down that ladder, out of this fertile stage in life, and we're no longer able to reproduce. So those are the 4 main hormonal patterns that women go through. The conclusion here is that female and male bodies are different, but we should still give them equal opportunities in treatment. The main implication is that because our bodies do different things, we have different factors. So I've never seen my male counterparts complain of a period cramp because they've never experienced it. but the act of being able to even have a period in the body affects so much more than just reproduction. So we have to start thinking about, I think one of the issues with Western medicine is we compartmentalize the body so much that we forget to think about how the circulatory system affects the nervous system and how the reproductive system affects literally everything. So what's stopping us from, being able to provide quality healthcare to both males and females? I would argue that we just don't know how. We don't have this standard for it. There's no rules around it. We can't test if our cancer treatments are good for both females and males because I don't think there's a good standard around it. So I'll be talking about standards, but first, let's talk about what is the things that we need to standardize. I think there's two things that we are missing in women's health. The first is that we just don't know enough information. If you think about it, literally like 100 years ago, that is when women got the vote. I do think we still have sexism in our society, especially in other parts of the world that are less developed and less forward thinking, if you want to say that. I do think there is that level of disparity. But even beyond that, like we haven't been studying female-specific diseases, causes, bodies for a really long time. For most of human history, we thought women were property. So, I mean, we don't deeply understand our property. Like we don't pay that much attention to it. So right now, global health research spends about 4% on female-specific causes, female-specific diseases, female-specific treatments, female-specific whatever. I think that number is way too low. The second thing is we don't distribute what we already know. We have tons of solutions. Like it's not rocket science to make a pad for menstruation, but there's still so many people around the world that lack all of the tools and products that we have available, mostly in the Western world. So I'm going to talk about those two things. Let's start with what we don't know. What we don't know as a society, what information that we are missing. The first one is hormones. This applies to both males and females, but hormones are, we always attribute our teenage problems, or at least I do, to hormones and, I'm just feeling hormonal today. But we actually don't really know exactly how they work that well. So just to simplify things, hormones start with some sort of stimuli. So if I am feeling anxious, my body might release the hormone cortisol, the stress hormone. Or if I just experience a really traumatic death in my family or something, my body might also get anxious. And again, cortisol. There's other stimuli inside the brain. There's external stimuli. Like if someone gives you a hug, you'll release oxytocin, which is the bonding and love hormone. But anyway, stimuli goes into your brain. And then the brain does something that we don't really understand exactly how it works. We know what regions of the brain are activated, but we don't know how that brings hormonal patterns. But then we have these hormonal patterns. And you can think about hormones as the cell phones of the body. Imagine if the whole world, all of a sudden, all of our cell phones shut off. That would be chaotic. We wouldn't know how to function if literally there was no form of communication. I bet most of you have your cell phone right on you right now. My cell phone is right next to me. It's literally attached to us. So imagine if the thing that facilitates our daily lives is just gone. That is how important hormones are. We don't understand how they correlate to disease. We don't know how to identify when they're imbalanced, because when a lot of diseases come out of hormonal imbalance, especially female diseases. So knowing when we have too much or too little hormones is super important. And then we don't know how they impact our brain and our moods, etc. So one of the interesting things, a project I did a few weeks ago, was look into menopause and how menopause contributes to quality of life. One of the things that menopause is characterized by is its drop in hormones, because when you don't have menstruation or pregnancy, you no longer need as many hormones in the body, so it starts to naturally decline. What is interesting that also happens in menopause that we didn't know for a long time, we didn't realize, we kind of just attributed to old age, was that there's also increases in diseases. So we have diseases like cancer, heart disease, whatever, it doesn't really matter. The list is very, very long. But what's important here is that hormones decrease and diseases increase. Now, not all of this is strictly because of hormones, but a huge chunk of it is. There's been tons of research. One of the most interesting books I've read recently was called Estrogen Matters. And they talked about how when women that are 50 and 60 going through menopause, they decrease in estrogen. Estrogen is one of the main hormones that goes down. It's often attributed as the female hormone, but as we decrease in estrogen, we right now there's this notion of estrogen causing breast cancer. So if we decreased estrogen, shouldn't we expect cancer rates to decrease at the same time? What happens is cancer rates, especially breast cancer, increases. So there's been a ton of studies looking into what estrogen actually does. Like, why have we said that it causes breast cancer when clearly when it goes down, breast cancer rates go up? There are other factors that come to play, but when women take the right dose of hormone replacement therapy, so during menopause, when their hormones drop, they take extra hormones to at least level out and let their body not experience such a dramatic decline. They found that cancer rates actually decreased if you took the right amount of hormones. So when menopause does happen and all these hormones drop, we have all these diseases. But then when you take hormones as supplements, these diseases start to go away. So it's this crazy thing that we don't really know how it works. And now we're trying to throw hormones at the problem. But I think it's a fascinating area, and it's crazy how we don't know enough. Then we have female-specific diseases. We're really bad at, number one, diagnosing them, and number two, treating them, which are the only two things you really have to be good at when it comes to a disease. So we can't do either of the only two things that we should do. Female-specific diseases happen in the female reproductive system, so that's why it's female-specific. Two examples. The first one, we have endometriosis, big word, but basically what it means is the endometrium, which is the lining of the uterus. It's a type of muscle. Every month, this muscle, muscular layer sheds blood, and that's why it's menstruation. In endometriosis, the endometrium grows beyond the uterus. So every month when there's that monthly shedding, which is initiated by those mysterious hormones that we don't really know how they work, every month there's internal bleeding. So 11% of women are quite literally internally bleeding. 10% of women have what's called polycystic ovarian syndrome. So if you look at the ovaries, they are much larger. They have non-cancerous tumors, which affect pain of menstruation, it affects regularity of menstruation, it affects fertility and tons of different things. Neither of these have cures, neither of them. So we don't know how to treat either of them. And this is just two of a very long list of female-specific diseases. Then we also have contraception and conception. So how do we stop babies from happening, and how do we make babies from happening? Right now, birth control has a ton of side effects. I know girls that have to switch their birth control pill every other month because one of them makes them super nauseous, another one makes them very depressed, and all these things. And it's crazy how we barely innovated the contraceptive space in such a long time. And then when it comes to conception, right now it's very expensive and very pokey. There's a lot of needles, a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of failure that comes with the process. So I think it doesn't hurt to become good at both of these things, especially since family planning and being able to control one's fertility has massive implications for the economy. Birth control was one of the main factors in why women started getting more of an education. Before we had birth control, only about 8%, less than 10% of women graduated universities, and now attendance at universities is more than males. It's 57%, all because of birth control. Or not all, but a massive portion because of being able to control your fertility. That's only 3 examples of what we don't know. I could literally do my another 4-hour presentation on, this one's not 4 hours, don't worry, but I could do a long presentation on what we don't know. But I'm gonna move on to distribution. Well, what do we not distribute? There's 2 main problems I want to talk about, and the first one is period poverty. 500 million women around the world do not have access to basic sanitation when it comes to menstruation. These are things like it's not that expensive to manufacture and create a tampon or a pad or a menstrual cup, etc. But people can't afford it, and that's just the reality. Even in the UK and developed places around the world, the number is like 1 in 10 women. Like, it is wild. And so as a result, people are using items that frankly should not be used in that region of the body. And as a result, they're getting bacterial infections and diseases that come with it. If we also look at where these women are that don't have access to these products, often they are in very unfortunate situations where they don't even have they don't even have clean water. They don't have ways to wash these things. So if they are using an old rag to collect their period blood, oftentimes they're using the same old rag for literally years or months at a time, and it still has old period blood, and it's just very unsanitary, and it's dangerous. It's crazy how this form of hygiene isn't a human right yet. So that is one massive issue that literally affects hundreds of millions of women. And then we have maternal mortality, which is the problem that I'm currently really passionate about, because over 90% of these 300 million deaths are preventable, and 97 to 99% happen in the developing world. So I wanted to show some graphs and stats on where exactly these are happening, just to give you an idea. 66% happen in sub-Saharan Africa, another 22% happen in South Asia. But what's fascinating to me, and what got me really interested in this problem, was that if we look at basically every other place except sub-Saharan Africa, all of the numbers are going downwards. Like North America, Europe and Central Asia, South Asia, all of them are on a downward trajectory. But if we looked at sub-Saharan Africa, it's very plateaued. It's very stagnant. That is where the most deaths occur, but it's also where the least progress is happening. Now, in this closer graph, we can just compare India. India is very clearly going down. But if we look at this blue line, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we have only gone up since 1990. If we look at Nigeria, we went up until the 2000s, then we went on a little downward trajectory till like 2008. And then since then, we have gotten worse since 2008. We are basically back to where we were in the 1990s. So these countries, which, by the way, we've spent billions of dollars trying to help them with this problem, they still experience it. If not, the numbers have gotten worse. So that blew me away, since we were everywhere else in the world, this problem was clearly being solved, but despite billions of dollars, we weren't making much progress. So bring that back to what the standards have to be about. The fact is, we don't know enough, and we don't distribute what we know. I think technology has an opportunity with these problems, specifically the first one. I know that technology, we can't just slap it on every problem, and it can't solve every problem, but I think in this scenario, it has huge potential. So let's talk about how we can know more, how we can gain the knowledge of hormones, female-specific diseases, contraceptive conception, and those are only 3 categories. We could talk about safer birthing techniques. We could talk about having less pain during birth. Like there's literally a wide array of possibilities, even within those 4 categories of female life and hormones. But I think there's 3 things that are going to make a significant impact in the next couple of years. So this isn't far out. I think most of these things that I'm about to talk about, we can do right now. We are in the stage of the world where we are like, I was in August when I was living in Amsterdam, I was talking to a founder, and they are basically creating food from thin air. They take oxygen and they can make protein. If we can make food from thin air, and we're making self-flying cars around the world, I think we can use artificial intelligence to understand the female body more. It is not rocket science. We have the tools today, and that's what's important. So let's talk about this framework. We start with data collection. So we want to collect something about the female body, because I don't think we have enough information and data out there. So we start with collecting, and then we want to understand that data, because just knowing someone's pH level or acidity in their body is not going to give us that much information. We want to understand it. And then we want to provide some service or value. So out of that data, we collect and understand what is the output and value of it. Data collection, we can start with hormones. This is a company based out of Berlin, and they test hormones out of saliva. I'm sure there's so many other cheaper and different ways we can do hormonal tests, whether that's like a prick of blood. We haven't innovated in the hormone testing space a lot. Huge opportunity. Then we have tampons and other period collection method models. I mean, once a month, women for several days at a time are excreting fluids, and these fluids can tell us a lot about their bodies. So why aren't we using tampons or menstrual cups or whatever as smart products? We can integrate sensors. We can integrate ways to understand the body at new dimensions with these new fluids. There's a company called Next Gen Jane, which is trying to develop the next generation of smart tampon technology. But I do think another area that is super neglected. And then my favorite and probably the most far out version is carbon nanotubes and other types of nanotechnology. So nanotechnology is technology to really small scale. So if we take carbon, so carbon nanotubes are a very thin layer of carbon, 1 atom thick, and then they're rolled over. So it's really sensitive. microscopic. You can't even see it with a naked eye. It is like 1/10000000th of a hair thick, like width of a hair thick. So it's really, really small. But these tiny nanoparticles have the potential to go in our bodies and become sensors that are not invasive, that are these bulky medical devices. But I do think like there's so much that is held there, and we can understand the body with these new types of smart and nanotechnologies. And then we have data understanding, machine learning, which is characterized by right now with training data. So it takes a lot of data to build our models and to spit out whatever we want the models to do. I think in the future, when we are able to use less data, that way we can make sure the data we're putting in the model is clean, it's equal, it's good data, high quality data. Because if we're putting garbage in the machine learning model, we're getting garbage outcomes. So training these models, super important. I'll talk about the standards in a moment. But then once we have this data collected, and then we have our models trained, we can provide different services. The first one, I'm going to talk about three main ones. Anomaly detection. So detecting when things are weird in the body. This is really important because we are way worse at diagnosing women with certain diseases than we are at diagnosing men. So we can use vital signs like period blood or hormones or saliva or whatever to understand bodies and recognize when the body is behaving abnormally. We can say, oh, these factors are weird. Do we have some sort of disease? And it can bring us one step closer to understanding these diseases. And then we have forecasting, so we can actually predict things. So we can predict what the exposure, so there have been a lot of studies right now that say the more females are exposed to estrogen in their lives, the less prone they are to different diseases. So we can start doing models to actually predict the effect of hormones on the body, which is going to be super important to even understanding these hormones. Then we have personalization. I'm very excited for this one. I think this one, if we think about personalized medicine, I do think that is the next step towards medicine, because I'm talking about how females and males are different, but the reality is we are all different. My body is different than your body. I might be different gender than you. I have different hormonal levels. I have different experiences. My brain is different. All of these things are so different. So why is everyone getting the same cures, and why is everyone getting the same antibiotics and same drugs and whatever? So I do think personalized medicine is the next step. So it's more than just female health and reproductive health, but one application of personalized medicine is contraceptives. Like I mentioned, birth control has tons of side effects. There's so much that is wrong with birth control. It can cause nausea, it can cause vomiting, it can cause weight gain, like all of these very negative things. I know so many people that have had negative experience with trying to control their fertility. Part of it is we don't personalize these products. Why isn't there an algorithmic way to produce birth control? That's just one application, but obviously it's so much more we can do once we have that data and we have a way to understand it. Now moving on to distribution. I think this problem is less affected by technology. I do think big data and all these crazy new technologies that we have will help us become less ignorant about the body and understand the world. But when it comes to distribution and spreading the information, the products, the services that we've already developed, I think it's more of a people problem than a tech problem, but I do think tech can help. We have mobile technology, or really any technology that connects the world. I was reading about, or I was watching a documentary the other day about how people in the developing world have more access to phones than they have to toilets or clean water. So mobile is everywhere, literally. And it has the ability to connect and share information. And then we have 3D printing, or any type of technology that makes manufacturing cheaper. I think this will help us do two things. We can build cheaper products so people can afford it more, or it's more accessible financially. And then we can scale information. There's a lot of information gaps, especially with my research in maternal mortality. People are just ignorant they don't know. It's not that they don't want to give birth. For example, one of the issues is giving birth in hospitals. People are giving birth at home without any skilled workers. It's not like they want to give birth without any skilled workers. They don't know why skilled workers are important. People, like in areas of the world, women, so in the area that I'm working in, which is Jigawa State in Nigeria, there's a 22% literacy rate for a female. So most people can't even read or write. So no wonder they don't have information. So is there ways to send information to people in the community that can read and write, and then are able to share that information to them? But now I want to talk about standards. I just gave you a quick crash course of all the things that I've been researching and working on within the women's health space and some of the insights that I've gained. But I do think we can take all of these insights and the realization that women and men are not the same. Biologically, we are different. We have different diseases. We go through different things. Our hormones are different. And we don't really know a lot about, well, either body. The human body in general, we don't know a lot, but only 4% of our research goes towards female-specific causes. So let's think about the standards and how we can build a more equal world built around excellence in this topic. I'm going to start with testing inclusivity. Put simply, we need diverse clinical trials. We need women to be represented. Right now, women are represented in less than 20% of trials. A lot of trials, there's some trials where women are 80% of the audience, other trials where they're 0% of the audience. So I think this one singular stat of overall how much they're represented isn't like, we have to also think about it per clinical trial. What is the fairness? So can we have a standard around clinical trials and ensuring that everything is tested on women well? The next thing is sex-specific treatments. When I think about solving problems, one of the main models that I learned, again, through the program that I was part of, the Knowledge Society, one of the first things I learned is the root cause analysis model, how we identify problems. So if we look at a tree and we look at the branches of a tree, these are often symptoms of the problem. So if you just address the symptom, the branch falls off, but you still have the root of the tree. But if you address the root of the problem, you can solve the problem. Right now, when we look at diseases, we're looking at that what's on the right side of the equal sign. We're not looking at what's on the left side of the equal sign, which is why whatever the outcome of the factors are. So if we remember the factors that I was talking about, women and men have different factors. Our root causes are different. And that's why we see disparities in diseases. I just brought up a few of the stats that I had on one of the first slides. Women are 2 times more likely to damage their ACL, 3 times here, 4 times here. We are just more likely to do different things. And it's because our factors are different. One of the things that I wonder a lot is the reason that we haven't cured cancer or figured out better ways to treat a lot of diseases because we are looking at them from a single gender view, we want a universal cure. We want one unisex version of all this. I wonder if that is just the wrong way to look at it because we're dealing with 2 different beings with different organs, different abilities in their body. Should we be thinking about them as 2 separate things? I think going even further than that, why are we trying to make something universal? Why aren't we going ahead and personalizing it? So that is one thing that I do think the world needs more of. Less compartmentalizing the systems in the body and really thinking about what is the implication of reproductive health on all of these diseases that we want to cure. And then moving on, I think to do this, to understand these novel sex-specific treatments that we want to have inclusive clinical trials for, we're going to need technology. This isn't something like we can't manually do things. I think technology is a superpower. We have the ability to do some really crazy things, but we want to do them fairly and we want to do them right. We want to make sure that these models are fair and they're equal. So this is sort of the model that I proposed a little bit earlier: data collection, understanding, providing some service or value, and to understand that data, we want training data. Moving on to the standards, I think we have to start by thinking about privacy and security. So since we do collect that data, how can we have a standard around analyzing and making sure that female-specific data is safe? And then, once we do have that model, I'll talk about the model in a moment, but once we have that model and we provide that value, provide that personalization, that anomaly detection, can we send that data out with privacy? Can we ensure that it is safe? Can we integrate different technologies that provide like blockchain? Can we make sure it's safe? I think data safety, especially in this increasingly digital world where we have all these new technologies popping up out of everywhere, let's make sure that what we do doesn't negatively impact women. We don't want any data leaks or data breaches, etc. Now, this middle part, I think, is the most difficult part. It is really hard because right now our machine learning models most of the time require a lot of data to be trained. So simply in machine learning, we want to take a bunch of data and we're going to train some model to get really good at understanding that data. So it might get really good at identifying cats versus dogs. So to identify cats versus dogs, that machine learning model will want to look at a bunch of dog pictures that are labeled dog and look at a bunch of cat pictures that are labeled cat. And after a while, it'll start to understand the similarities and differences. It takes a lot of data to do that. But what if, like, when it comes to women's health data and dealing with women's health and female-specific causes, we don't have a lot of good data. We don't have a lot of good data sets to train our models on. And even if we do have data sets right now, there might not be too many, there might not be enough data in that data set, so we might not have enough to train models, or there might be bias. There's been a lot of studies and research into the quality of the data around the world. One of the interesting ones that I heard about a few weeks ago was there was a study that looked into how machine learning models they read a bunch of books, artificial intelligence read books, and it described women in terms of their body shape and men in terms of their intellect, which is just an example of we are using human data that is biased. Our books, our stories, a lot of things around the world, the news is very biased. And that can go into our models and build models with bias. Now, the last thing is involving female opinions. Throughout history, we have made female products like the tampon, speculum, birth control without female consent. All of these very used female products were built by males, which is fine, but very few females were consulted in this process. So it doesn't really matter who builds it, but how do we consult it? How do we consult females to ensure that they get value from these things? Now, there's two things that I think involving female opinions needs. We have to consider. First is reviewing the standards. So how can we look at the standards that exist today and how do we involve female opinions? And then setting new standards. So what I'm really saying is we need a standard for standards. How do we ensure that our standards provide equal opportunity and equal treatments, equal exposure, equal safety for women and men? How do we ensure that we've reviewed the standards to be safe? I think this involves female opinions, but more importantly, diverse opinions. So when we're dealing with, let's just take female-specific health, we want to consult women, but we don't want to just consult white women. We want to consult women of all colors, of all sexualities, of all ages. Oftentimes we leave out ages. I know standards are set in different parts of the world that are often inaccessible for young people. I do think we have new technologies right now that help connect us digitally. That's why we're able to have this conference and have this session right now. But I do think having diverse opinions, especially with young people, is really important. I'm going to throw out two more stats at you, and then we'll finish up the session. The first is that my generation, or Generation Z, has 40% buying power. So in a couple of years, we are going to control 40% of the market. That's huge. And then women specifically have 83% buying power because they're often the head of the house. They often control household spending. So young women make up massive shares of the market and buying power, but we're not being targeted enough. We're not being asked, like very few of my young teenage female peers are asked to give their opinions. I've had the opportunity to work for different companies through TKS and sit on different decisions and have them value my voice as a young person. I mentioned earlier that I'm on the board for Aleph Farms. They built a whole Generation Z board to involve young people from all over the world. There's 7 of us from every single continent, or almost every single continent. And they just want to get these young people's opinions. And I think companies are now drifting into this model of involving diverse opinions. And ultimately, I do think that is going to make our standards better. So thank you so much for the session. I hope you found it informative. If you want to contact me, you can take those devices and just scan the barcode. It'll give you my contact information. And if you want to learn more, this will link to my recent article and work in the female health technology space, where you'll get a very comprehensive overview of the issue. I think now I can stop sharing.
Yeah, thanks so much for that presentation. You really got us to think differently about some of the issues. For us, data bias is a big challenge, getting the right people involved. Lots of people are asking about in a world where genders are non-binary, how do we take what you've told us and translate it in the real world where we know that there are other genders?
Yeah, for sure. I think what I mentioned earlier on is, right now I was just talking about biologically. So this is just what people are born with. I'm not too, I didn't want to, I know there's so many aspects of it. I know there's some questions about male specific issues. Both matter. I think everything matters. I think the thing right now I believe, is how do we start collecting data, no matter what you identify as, no matter even like this can apply for both males and females. I do think it is a very touchy topic. If I had all the time in the world, I would do all my research and do things in there. So I don't think I have a great answer to that, but I do think like the important thing is data is power. Data gives us knowledge, but without understanding that data, we won't get any interesting insights. So being able to, I think the digital standards, if anything, are the most important when it comes to healthcare, because again, I want a personalized world. It doesn't have to be gender specific. I want everyone everywhere to have the proper healthcare that they need. So I'm really rooting for getting these models to work really well, no matter non-binary, whatever your gender is and whatever you classify as.
Thanks. And a lot of people are raising the point about specific illnesses that are more prevalent in men, for example.
Yeah.
There's a whole other question to do.
Whole other presentation for sure.
Let's have a look at what else have we got coming in. This is a question from Paul Robbins. Can you say what cultural inequalities, how they affect the hormonal balance in females?
That is a very interesting question. So one thing I found really interesting was in the US healthcare system, or in the US in general, Black women tend to have more stress. And that is often attributed to structural racism. So racism throughout the system, they feel stressed out because they go to schools where they might be the only African American in their group, or even just people of color in general. They feel like they're the minority. So there have been a lot of studies, documentaries attributed to this massive issue of racism in America as an example. So I assume in other areas where there's a lot of stress or pressure. So if we think about hormones, what affects hormones? Stress is a huge indicator of that. So if I feel really stressed out, my body isn't going to be functioning properly, no matter it's not even just hormonal health. Stress affects everything. That is one of the reasons that I've invested so much of my time and mental energy into being able to deal with my stress levels. And now I'm very good at dealing with my stress because I learned so much about the health implications of stress. Because if your brain is stressed out, if your body is stressed out, you're not going to work as well. So any situation with stress, I think, and stress can be brought out by cultural inequalities like racism, for example.
Great. Yeah, and a lot of people are asking about how we can make the standards development process just more interesting to get that more diverse group of people involved. And also in the research and development of products and services and indeed cures, Sarah asked, what do you think will be the key message to encourage involvement in that process? So
involvement, we're talking about young people specifically.
That as well, but I think women too.
Yeah. One thing I think I'm going to talk about from the perspective of a young woman, because I think they're often, one of the issues that I see with a lot of my peers and friends is there's a lack of wanting to stand up for yourself, and there's almost like an insecurity issue overall. But what I found with a lot of my peers and friends, and even women that are older, etc., is we do want to help. We do want to help, but a lot of times society suppresses us, or there's just this notion of being insecure and not confident that makes us not want to get our voices heard. What I think is important is that voices do want to be heard, but not everyone has the courage to speak up. I was really fortunate that I have mentors. I have people around the world that, again, Olympic level training to solve big problems involves confidence training. I've had so many people that have helped leveled up my confidence, but it's not like they created this desire to want to do big things in the world. I always had the desire. I think a lot of people do have the desire and want to be part of this process. I don't think it's about making it seem I think it's exciting. I think part of it is also communication. I think the actual, when I really got to go into the standards and learn about the standards process, it is so fascinating and so interesting for me. And I think most people don't understand how important this is and how important having a body of excellence in the world is. So I think if I was to put it down into a few things, number one, with young women especially, they do want to be heard and they do want to be involved, but they just don't have the opportunity. We very rarely talk to a 15-year-old girl for their perspective. It's very novel. Or even when I was getting started in my sort of journey, at first, people were like, why is this 15-year-old talking? And then when I did start saying my opinion or whatever, everyone's like, oh, she actually has a really good voice. So I think with young women, that's the case. For women in general, I don't know if it's they don't want to help problem. I think they don't know they can help problem. There's a lot of ambiguity. If I want to right now, if I want to solve a really big problem in the world, there's no institution that helps me do that. There's no right way to get there. So I wonder if maybe there is a good way to get them in these leadership positions, but it has a lot of ambiguity. It has a lot of challenges going there. But if I was to wave a magic wand and give everyone one power, I would give, if we're talking about women specifically, self-confidence and being able to be your own superhero and cheerleader. I think if we can give everyone that, the world would be a much better place.
Fantastic, Isabella. Well, you don't strike me as somebody who needs any more confidence than you already have. I can tell you that some of the comments that are coming through are extremely positive and telling you not to give up and to be your own superhero, and you keep going and keep fighting for this one, because it's something that really counts. And certainly in the standards as well, we're doing a lot of things already. We are inspired by the book Invisible Women, which talks about data bias and the way gender data bias is affecting some of the decisions that are being made. And also we are working with in fact, Stephanie Einon, who was looking after this event for us, is the chair of the UN activity on the gender responsive standards and standards development. We have a couple of questions coming through, maybe just to close, about privacy. Is that something that you want to talk on as well? Because collecting with things like wearable tech, there's lots of question marks about privacy. We're collecting lots of personal data. How do we trade off the benefits of the data from the privacy implications?
I'm thinking, I think this is such a huge issue, and it matters so much more than just healthcare and wearables. The first thing that comes to mind is, how can we make sure that we're tracking the data and give everyone transparency to where that data is going? Because realistically, when I go on my phone and I go on like Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, I don't know where any of my data is going. I was in Los Angeles a few weeks ago before the whole quarantine. And I was at a company, which I won't mention the name, but they do a lot of, they have a type of artificial intelligence that by just your Instagram feed, they can tell you your personality traits. They can tell you so much about about yourself. It really felt like my Instagram doesn't even have that many pictures or whatever, but they were able to classify what I like to do in my time, all these things. And it was like, this model knows me so well by this little data. And this is public available data. So I don't know that there are companies like that. They're using it for a good reason, but we have the ability to literally scrape our phones and use our data everywhere. So I think being able to know, there's no place I can go right now to tap my phone and be like, where's my data? Who is using my data? What is my data being used for? Why can't I see that transparency? And I think that is one thing that I've noticed. A lot of people around my age, again, this is just the demographic that I'm around a lot, they're like, well, I don't want to keep on using these products if they are using my data and not telling me what my data is valued for, and I'm not getting value from that data being used. So I think the first and foremost step is, how do we include traceability into this whole process? That might be a technically difficult problem. I don't know that much about it, but I do think that is the first step. I want to know where my data is being used. Otherwise, I will, I have stopped using products because I'm I don't want to, I read through I'm the type of person that reads the terms and conditions. That's just me. But I don't want to use products where I don't know what's being safe. And I think that's going to be an increasing trend with this very digital world.
Isabella, thanks a lot. Listen, if the standards world is going to respond to all these challenges, we need to make sure that our processes are open and that we are as diverse and inclusive as we can be. And we thank you for inspiring us with those words and to reminding us of how important this area is. We'll certainly share your presentation, and you may well hear from us again. But Isabella, on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. I had an awesome time.